Welcome to Man in America, a voice of reason in a world gone mad. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. Our country just experienced a crippling storm. A lot of regions are still without power. We're talking millions of people that are without power primarily because of this freak ice storm that dumped up to 2 inches of ice in some regions, collapsing telephone poles, snapping power wires, trees cracking and falling to the ground. I mean, it was apocalyptic. Now, what's interesting is that leading up to this storm over the past week, I noticed in my area of upstate New York, very, very heavy chemtrailing. And when I mentioned weather to a lot of you, a lot of the comments that I was seeing is that you were seeing the same thing, extremely heavy chemtrailing in your area. And of course, this makes me think, what does this have to do with this giant winter storm, which is seemingly random? It seemed like the perfect equation of hot air coming up from the Gulf and from California and cold air coming down from the Arctic at the same time meeting with just the right conditions for this ice storm. And I thought, there's got to be something going on here. On top of that, I was seeing more and more videos spreading online of people taking the ice from the storm, these snowballs, taking the snow, and holding it over a lighter. And the snow wasn't melting, the snow was burning and oftentimes giving off a plastic smell. That's not the snow I grew up with as a kid, that I was eating and playing with. And so this got me thinking, and so I reached out to Dane Wigington. So Dane runs geoengineeringwatch.org. And he's one of the most respected voices on not climate change, but geoengineering. And he's been working for decades to help people around the world understand what's actually happening, what's going on when they're spraying our skies. He created a documentary called The Dimming, which if you haven't seen it, I recommend it. I think you can watch it on his website here. And he has just been very, very focused on understanding exactly what is going on. And so on today's show with Dane, we're going to be going into all the things that he saw with this storm that did not make sense from a natural perspective, but made perfect sense if you understand this as an engineered storm. And I even asked him a question. I said, Dane, how much of this storm do you think was actually created by man? And his answer will surprise you and shock you. Or maybe it'll just be like, yeah, that's what I expected. And so we're going to be diving into some of the mechanisms used, how the air was controlled, how HAARP is involved, how the stratospheric spraying is involved, and so much more. But also then ask the question of who's behind this? Is our government going to stop doing it? What can we do about it? And so much more. So this is a really important episode. I also hope that if you watch it and you get something from it, please share it with your friends and family. Also, make sure you leave a comment, hit that like button. And if you're watching this on Rumble, because it won't be on YouTube because they censor stuff like this, because I think I mentioned vaccine a few times, so of course they'll censor it on YouTube. But if you're watching on Rumble, thank you for supporting a free speech platform. Now, before we jump in, though, I do have one quick thing to share with you. After seeing what happened with this ice storm and seeing these pictures and videos of these emptied out store shelves with nothing, all the bread's gone, the milk is gone, there's no generators, it was a stark reminder to me that unfortunately a lot of Americans just aren't prepared. Because if you're prepared, you're not the one that's rushing out at the last minute to go buy 10 loaves of bread. You've thought that through. Now, I know a lot of you are very prepared, and that's why you're watching shows like this where I cover these issues. But unfortunately, I think so many Americans just aren't prepared. And I truly believe that when a disaster strikes an area, the number one cause of death isn't necessarily the hurricane winds or the tree that fell in the house. It's that people weren't prepared. They didn't have access to clean water. They didn't have food. They didn't have a way of heating their house if the power went out, and so much more. And so as part of my own mission to help as many Americans as possible to become more prepared for whatever comes their way, and if you watch this show and you understand what's coming, there's a lot more stuff that's going to be happening. Right? I want to be sober about that, is that we're not entering in this golden age where there's no more winter, weather warfare or whatever. All the signs show that things are going to get tough. It's not a bad thing because we're going to get through it, but it's really important to be prepared. So as part of that mission, I've just launched a new site that's completely free. Okay. Trust me, it's completely free. There's a site, it's called readyscore.com. And what it is it's a simple 7 or 8 minute test. It's, I think, 38 questions. And the whole point of it is to help assess how prepared you actually are. Because being prepared is so multifaceted. You think about so many things, from communication to water purification to medicine to fuel. And it's really easy to miss a few things, but those few things that you miss can really affect you. And so what I've done is I've put together this quiz on here that is free. And so what you do is ask you quiz. I think there's 38 questions. And what you do is you go on it, you click on Get Your Ready Score, and then you go through and you answer the questions. So it covers water, food, energy and shelter, health and hygiene, communication, security, community planning, and mindset and faith. And so after you finish that, what it does is it gives you a free report. It just shows you, it loads up on the web browser, and it shows you what your preparedness score is. So what your ready score is. It's on a rank from 1 to 100, with 100 being ultra prepared. But then it also kind of goes in each different area and shows you where you're lacking. Right? So if you have a weakness in food or a weakness in water, it'll actually help you understand that. So this is a really important tool for you to better understand how prepared your family is, whether it's for a natural disaster, whether it's for civil unrest and riots, whether it's for lockdowns. Say something happens to the supply chain, you can't go buy groceries anymore. So again, it's free. Take some time. It helps give you a roadmap to understand what you can do to be better prepared. So again, the website is just readyscore.com. It's where you go and get your ready score. Okay. What is your ready score? I think my ready score was 73 when I did the test, and we're still kind of modifying a little bit. We just launched it like literally today. So I'm still tweaking things, but I'd love to see what your thoughts are. And if you take it, let me know in the comments or on social media. Let me know what your ready score is. I'd love to see, because my goal is to get as many of us as possible up to a ready score that's like 80 or above, where it's like, doesn't matter what the government throws at us, whether it's Maui wildfires or ice storms or who knows what else, that we're strong, we're united, and we'll get through it. So again, that's readyscore.com. All right, now please enjoy this interview with Dane Wigington. Mr. Dane Wigington, it's so good to have you back on the show. It's been quite some time, but we have a lot to get into today. So thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thank you for your voice, Seth. Again, it's people like you that help us to be able to sound the alarm and reach the people we need to reach while we can still do some good in this equation.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. And that's why I started this. And so there's a lot I want to cover with you. And obviously we're coming off of a pretty significant winter storm. There's now another storm kind of forecast for this coming weekend. And just to kind of frame our overall discussion, you know, with my wife and my kids and I, we're very healthy. We don't do vaccines. We eat almost all organic. We raise our own chickens. We garden. But the one thing that makes me angrier than any other thing out there is when I walk out on a beautiful day. You know, we're on 7 acres in the middle of a very nice forest, and I want my kids outside, look up, and there's just streaks and streaks of chemicals across the sky. My wife starts kind of choking a little bit if we're out too long, because like I can choose to not vaccinate my kids, but I'm not going to keep them inside because I'm scared of what's happening in the sky. But it seems like it's such a violation of so many things, what they're doing. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because this is a topic that is really near and dear to me.
That is the bottom line. You just hit the bottom line right on the head. No matter what else we do, if we can't breathe without sucking in what they're dispersing, then is that not a fight for life right here, right now, a contamination that's ubiquitous all over the globe? And there are still, from this administration and some others, still a pushing of the patently false narrative that this is just a jet exhaust issue that couldn't be further from the truth. And we even have some that pretend to be fighting climate engineering that are pushing the same narrative. Whatever's motivating them, I don't know. But there's no debate, there's no theory, there's no hypothesis on this being sprayed dispersions. We have up close film footage of these aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible, turning dispersions on and off. Geoengineeringwatch.org is the only entity that took a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration flying lab to altitude to test what these heavy aircraft were emitting, processed that at Rensselaer Polytechnic in New York, one of the world's most renowned testing institutions, found exactly what we knew we'd find, starting with aluminum nanoparticles. And we worked also, Seth, with the University of Minnesota, about 500 lab tests. Looked like our site wasn't loading there for some reason. Sometimes there's a lot of traffic on our site right now. It can't keep up.
It looks like not, that little mini, that your player in the middle.
And on the left, it's not loading all the way. It's because of so much traffic right now. You see, we're at almost 52 million visitors.
Good for you.
So far, the site maybe can't keep up, but it'll catch up soon. We have some pretty big service with GoDaddy, but we worked exclusively also with University of Minnesota, about 500 lab tests, and extrapolated the amount of material in that precipitation over that state and projected that globally in something in the range of 40 to 60 million tons of toxic nanoparticles are being dispersed annually. You can't put 40 to 60 million tons of abrasive materials through jet turbines and think those jets are going to fly more than a few miles from the end of the runway. And if this was a jet exhaust issue, every single airport would be so contaminated, there would be uninhabitable zones for hundreds of miles in every direction around that. This is a sprayed particulate dispersion. And Seth, you've heard the term stratospheric aerosol injection, right?
Exactly.
That's the science of what's going on. Is it stratospheric aerosol exhaust? No, it's stratospheric aerosol injection. This is a payload dispersion period. And they're not about to disclose this issue, Seth, because the liability issue is completely incalculable. This is literally weather warfare right now, winter weather warfare with chemical ice nucleation for weather modification, as we discussed. And I think you said you might show a video that shows our test of that, because most people don't realize an endothermic reaction is every bit as profound as an exothermic reaction. You can have some very small element that explodes into fire and heat, and you can have the reverse of that with the right chemicals, an energy absorbing reaction. And that's exactly what they're doing to atmospheric moisture and creating this cold insulator of air that descends to the surface. They create sensationalized headlines. This material is extremely cold to the touch for those that have run their hands into this material and realized how cold they get and how fast. So again, this is chemical winter weather warfare, Seth.
It's so mind blowing. But I want to start with playing this short video you mentioned. Sure. This is over on your YouTube channel, which is just at Dane Wigington. I think we'll play the first, say, 65 seconds or so. It's a pretty short, or about a little over a minute. It's a pretty short video, but this will help set up our discussion.
Massive storms, snow and ice now span 1,300 miles as power outages mount and roads close. That's from CNN News. From Fox Weather, crippling ice threatens millions in historic winter storm path with major power outages and travel issues. Now consider this former headline from ABC. Artificial snowstorm brings chaos to Beijing. So, the Chinese can routinely engineer winter weather mayhem and the USA can't? Really? If you think chemical ice nucleation isn't a thing, think again. Chemical ice nucleation is one of the biggest weapons in the climate engineering arsenal. It is imperative for this fact to be understood and acknowledged by anyone that is truly trying to expose and halt the climate engineering operations. What is chemical ice nucleation and how is it used for climate engineering? Energy-absorbing elements create an endothermic or energy-absorbing reaction, as this lab demonstration clearly shows. Such materials have an absolutely profound effect on precipitation behavior and can convert what should have been liquid precipitation into frozen precipitation. Endothermic materials are specifically named in climate engineering patents. The weather modification patent shown is expressly for a chemical ice nucleation process. This patent was filed over a half-century ago. For how many decades have we been exposed to completely engineered weather that official sources are still trying to convince the population is only natural?
So just a few questions from that, and also just thank you for consistently doing this. I know that there's a lot to get into, but I've been following you for years now, and you're consistently one of the people that is bringing so much information out there. And these videos, which I've showed your videos on countless shows of mine, whether it's looking at hurricane paths being redirected or so many other issues. So thank you for that, because it's a really good tool that you've built with your website, and I encourage people to go there. But so looking at this, we just had this, massive ice storm, right? It wasn't a typical winter storm. Where I'm at in upstate New York, it was for us. We got 18 inches of snow, no power outages. Okay, it is what it is. But the threat from this is similar to what happened in Texas. It was the freezing rain that crippled the grid infrastructure, that locked up transportation and so much more. And one thing I noticed, though, is both in my area and people, because I ask commonly on social media, what are things like in your area? People noted extremely heavy chemtrailing a week or so leading up to when this storm hit. So when you watched this storm and you saw this storm developing and you have seen the aftermath of it, how much of this storm do you think was actually engineered, and how'd they do that?
All of it. You start with that, all of it. That's not to say that if they weren't doing any of this, we wouldn't have some kind of weather. But once they've tainted the weather, they've tainted all the weather. They've disrupted the entire weather climate system, the hydrological cycle. This is the butterfly effect on steroids. They're doing this all over the globe. Even if it was going on in one country, it would affect the entire globe, but it's going on in every country actively or passively participating. And the amount of control they have over the climate system, and it's a chaotic control. I want to make that clear. This is more like manipulated climate chaos in many ways, because the forecasts are all over the board, because this is not an exact scenario. They're just simply disrupting the system with a particular objective. So they can do everything, Seth, from manipulate upper level pressure zones, which in turn manipulates upper level wind flows, jet stream flows. Picture the front of a car engine that has a fan belt that goes clockwise around some pulleys, counterclockwise around other pulleys, that being the jet stream. So with high and low pressure zones, they can manipulate that flow amazingly well. And this is patented technology. Again, we're not reaching for straws or speculating. We know in the case of ionosphere heaters like HAARP, and HAARP is one of about 100 around the globe.
Something strange is happening with the silver market right now, and most people have no idea. Pause for a second and think about this. Why is silver up nearly 200% in the past year? Bank of America's head of metals research just released a report saying that silver could hit $309 an ounce this year. That's Bank of America saying this. At the same time, the U.S. Mint has paused silver sales because prices are moving so fast they can't keep up. That doesn't happen in normal markets. What's going on is a global silver squeeze, with countries around the world scrambling to lock up physical silver while supply tightens. And at the same time, the old paper price rigging system, the LBMA and the COMEX, is starting to crack, which means the real value of silver and gold is beginning to emerge. Yes, silver is already at a historic high, but many experts believe this move is just getting started as the paper market breaks down and physical supply gets squeezed even further. Honestly, this could be a rare opportunity to build real generational wealth, but the window's closing. Right now, Noble Gold is still able to maintain a reliable supply of physical silver at fair prices while others are running dry. This isn't financial advice. Do your own research, but don't ignore what's happening. The window is closing. So take action today by visiting goldwithseth.com or calling 877-646-5347. Again, that's goldwithseth.com or 877-646-5347.
We know the effect. This is a weapon of mass destruction. There's nothing benign about it. When they can transmit, in the case of HAARP in Alaska, it's an ionosphere heater. That's a literal term. It can transmit 3.6 million watts of power into the electrically charged ionosphere, causes an electrical chain reaction. This is literally to completely derail the planet's miraculous life support systems. Who has a right to do that? So when they transmit that power into the ionosphere in the northern hemisphere, that creates, again, electrical chain reaction, creates massive heating in that level of the atmosphere, causes it to expand up and down. The downward push is a high pressure dome that spins upper level wind currents clockwise, like a pulley I described earlier in the northern hemisphere. So they're high pressure doming the west right now, for example, which spins the moisture and the upper level wind currents clockwise up and over us, back down into the eastern U.S. And you may have seen Juneau, Alaska recently. They were pumping what amounts to moisture from Hawaii into Alaska and chemically nucleating it. They got like 7 or 8 feet of snow. And there you go. I mean, this is on this map right here. You can see if people want to get warmer, they need to head to the Arctic. Do we see the news covering that? Does the news say it's 40 degrees above normal in the Arctic and Greenland?
Oh, so sorry. This is showing that they're based upon baseline temperatures, that it's
Yes.
a 40-degree warmer anomaly up north, while it's a 40-degree cooler anomaly down south. So basically, am I correct in understanding that what they're doing is that they're pulling that cold air from the north and shoving it down to the south, which then creates the warm up there? Or are they using, say, HARP and things like that to kind of heat the air up in the Arctic, which then forces the cool air down this way?
Yes, because in the stratosphere over the Arctic, we recently recorded temperatures 60 degrees above normal. So again, they are literally using the atmosphere for a battleground. We will all soon pay the price, and this is part of the equation, pushing cold air south, stealing it from the Arctic, literally. But then they combine that with manipulated moisture flows coming straight off the record warm Gulf of Mexico and the record warm Gulf of California, flows coming from the southwest. Since when do you have winter storms with moisture flowing right off the record warm Gulf of Mexico? And they're chemically nucleating that, Seth. And when you get the ice storms, it's because that chemically nucleated material is hitting the surface before it sets up. So that's exactly where the ice storms are coming from. And you have typically now in a quote winter storm, you have a warm side to a winter storm and a cold side. Really? Historically, that's absolutely absurd. And you have an ice zone transition area between where the warm flows of moisture are and where the chemical nucleation process is advanced enough to start having various forms of frozen material falling from the sky, which includes cotton ball sized so-called snowflakes to little styrofoam ball looking frozen material to what looks like a grain of rice. I mean, it's absolutely absurd what's going on. And Seth, you remember a year ago, January 21st, remember the blizzard in New Orleans?
Yeah.
So January 21st of 2025, we had a blizzard in New Orleans. We had blizzards on the Gulf Coast, blizzard in Florida, never before recorded in New Orleans. What didn't they tell us? On that exact day, it was above freezing and raining in the Arctic, in Alaska, Greenland, Iceland, Siberia. While there's a blizzard in New Orleans, it's above freezing and raining in the middle of winter in the Arctic. Let's go back further. Seth, you remember the big Texas deep freeze a few years ago?
Oh, yeah. I think they called it URI, I think, URI. Was it 2021, I believe?
Yep. So we had temperatures below zero in some regions of Texas, for example, Dallas. On that same day, it was 33 degrees warmer at the North Pole, literally. Same day. Media does not tell us this. So it's a look here, don't look there scenario. And this is a core component of climate engineering, engineered chemical winter weather that even those that claim to be fighting climate engineering are not addressing. Why aren't they addressing it? And for proof of these operations, further proof, I should say, I would encourage your followers, listeners to search Chinese scientists engineer snowstorm. And they'll find going all the way back to 2009. Let's go back further because these patents are old. In fact, the first chemical nucleation patent we found was from 1950. These are very established processes. So in the case of Chinese scientists engineer snowstorm, you'll find Popular Science covered it, MSNBC, The Guardian, CNN, everybody covered it. The Chinese were engineering snowstorms. They did a bunch of damage to Beijing. There you go. And it's certainly not the first, but that's what they're claiming there. But the bottom line is this is very established practice. And yet you bring it up here in the US and suddenly they try to marginalize you because they don't want the public to wake up to the fact that they're the victims of what amounts to winter weather warfare. And Seth, these processes are wreaking havoc on flora and fauna, what's left of it.
And so to understand specifically, this is helpful in looking at this recent ice storm. Now, I'm going to try to simplify it and let me know if my simplified version matches your understanding. So let's just say they wanted to create a big ice storm across the middle of America. That I imagine that there's a multi-step process, but one of those steps would be a lot of cloud seeding, right? Or a lot of more injection of particles into the atmosphere, right? Which chemtrailing, dumping silver iodide, other chemicals, et cetera, into that cloud layer. But then taking this, pull up the map actually, because it's kind of helpful in looking at this map right here. So then it's like if they fill the sky with all these chemicals, especially in the regions where they want to create that ice, if they can then take this hot air from the Arctic and force it down, which then forces the cool air down, and it creates this really cool air right across the middle of America. But then they have the heat coming from California in and the heat coming from, say, Mexico and the Gulf up, and they basically then take that cold air and smash it up against that warm air in a place where the atmosphere is already heavily seeded with certain chemicals that then react to that meeting of the hot and the cold air, and that creates a brutal ice storm. Is that an accurate understanding of how that would work?
It is. It is. And so let's add more credence to what you just outlined. That's why you now have thunder snow. That's why you now have thunderstorms
and tornadoes even.
Side. Exactly, because you have these colliding air masses and they're chemically nucleating them. And it's absurd. And Seth, you see that there's baseball and softball size hail falling everywhere now in the slightly warmer months. That's because they're chemically nucleating those convective cumulus clouds. So there's so much more baseball and softball size hail falling now that insurance companies are canceling any coverage for that across the board. I mean, this is absurd. And we have the environmentalist communities. And I'm an environmentalist to the core. I would live in a teepee and eat acorns. If I could live on a healthy planet, I would do it in a second. But why are the environmentalist communities, they're ignoring this elephant in the equation, the single most destructive human activity of all short of nuclear cataclysm, because they're trained and programmed at this point, and those that actually head those organizations and their 501c3 nonprofits, they're protecting those. And we know that. At geoengineeringwatch.org, our attorneys spoke to attorneys from all the major environmental groups, and they told us that off the record. They don't want to address this issue because they don't want to lose their 501c3s. Is that not the epitome of criminal hypocrisy? And we have the spiritual institutions, unfortunately, doing exactly the same. The nonprofit status is a leash from the controllers. That's exactly what it is. And congregations should hold their leaders accountable. We're not allowed to look the other way. And I've met with pastors from some major institutions in Northern California. First thing they said to me was, well, we don't need to worry about it. It's all in big hands. Wait a minute. You show me in scripture where it says that you can look the other way. Show me. It doesn't say that. So again, we need some morality in this equation because there's a lot of moral bankruptcy. And this is, again, the gravity of this issue cannot be overstated. So many people at this point are literally arranging deck chairs on the Titanic. If we don't seal this biggest hole in the bottom of the boat, all of their causes and concerns will soon be moot point. And every single day, as you brought up at the beginning of this exchange, every breath we take, we are sucking up nanoparticles. And you mentioned silver iodide, and that's mostly associated with localized, publicized cloud seeding, which I want to stress is a completely different animal than climate engineering. And many people don't know that because the power structure is trying to blur that line. They're trying to make people think, well, all that's going on in our skies is a single engine propeller driven airplane with a few flares on the wings. No big deal. It's distributing a few dozen pounds of material at best, not a military tanker that can drop somewhere close to 100 tons in the case of a KC-135 in a single flight. Again, we're talking about 40 to 60 million tons annually. This is the greatest source of damaging atmospheric particulate pollution. So there's a lot of deception going on here. But the bottom line is we have to deal with this issue or nothing else will matter. So,
I mean, I absolutely agree with you. And so to me, it's obvious to look at the indicators and see really all the evidence that this was, very manufactured, right? Engineered, right? And not to mention videos I'm seeing of people literally going outside and grabbing a big chunk of snow, taking it, holding it over a sink and holding a lighter to it. And it just burns. It doesn't melt. It actually burns. It turns black, which the snow I grew up with as a kid, I was never burning it over, a lighter, right? But that's not how snow should behave, right? And so when we see those videos, actually, maybe if I have one, I'll see if I can pull one up while you're talking. But what is it that's causing that reaction where snow is literally burning and turning black instead of melting?
We can't know all the constituents in this toxic mix. There are those we do know, though. Aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, surfactants, graphene. So in the case of the polymer nanoparticles, again, listed in climate engineering patents, they're certainly a part of the mix. Testing has proven that. when I was trekking once in trailless wilderness after one of these chemically nucleated events,
Actually,
there
sorry.
was let's watch this first.
Yeah, I'll turn the volume off because it's not really necessary, but this is,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, you don't see any water dripping off of there, and it's just turning black.
There's a few factors in play here. One, a chemically nucleated element tends to sublimate, which means it converts from a solid to a gas and bypasses much or most of the liquid phase. That's why we're not getting as much runoff off of this chemically nucleated material in the Colorado River Basin, for example. Two, again, the polymer fibers, graphene, the other elements, and they would potentially react in a way that what we just saw. When I was trekking this wilderness, as I mentioned before, there was a sandbar in some of the runoff in a creek that I was by, and the sandbar was blue from the sediment coming off of this material. It had accumulated in that particular spot. I didn't have any way to take a sample, or I would have, but this is not unique to what I saw. There's been mainstream coverage of different tints of hues of snowstorms from everywhere from Russia to parts of the US, Canada. I mean, we don't know the totality of what they're putting into this mix at this point because they don't care, because they're not being held accountable. I mean, what is our government being held accountable for at this point? And this is not a left, right, blue, red, Democrat, Republican issue. That's two sides of the same coin. We have the same people in charge here. Those who print the money, they control matrix, militaries, they control the narrative. So again, people need to get past their political polarization, Seth. And the bottom line is this is destroying our environments, destroying our soils. It is literally sterilizing soils, so much so. And we know in the case of aluminum, in fact, that's a primary element in these patents. It showed up in all of our rain tests. That's what's brought me into this fight. For your listeners that don't know about geoengineeringwatch.org, or maybe haven't seen our documentary, The Dimming, what brought me into this battle was I 20 plus years ago, I built an off-grid home in the wilderness of Northern California with solar, wind, and hydro. I have some background in that area. I worked for Bechtel Power when in my youth, the world's largest engineering firm. My home was on the cover of the world's largest renewable energy magazine. No sooner did I finish this project, I'm losing 50, 60, 70% of my solar power uptake from whatever these aircraft were emitting. I knew that couldn't be, quote, condensation. And that's not a 50, 60, 70% loss of visible light. I want to make that clear. Solar panels need direct sunlight, unobstructed. So this is the stated purpose of stratospheric aerosol injection. And we know they're injecting in the troposphere, by the way. That's just a term. And we have many deniers getting caught up in that term. Well, this isn't happening in the stratosphere, therefore it can't be geoengineering. That's a game of semantics, okay? This is geoengineering, and they're spraying in the stratosphere because they can't carry the heavy payloads, or they're spraying in the troposphere, because they can't carry the heavy payloads to the stratosphere. So anyway, I was losing my solar panel power. I tested my rain, did not want to find aluminum. I did. The more I tested, the worse the test got, until I had one rain test with 450 parts per billion of aluminum nanoparticles. That's toxic rain. So here where I live, in my location that was thriving 20 years ago, so much contamination has fallen in the rain. It's changed soil pH values 10 to 12 times toward alkaline. Aluminum tends to push the pH toward neutral from either side. And we know aluminum, based on peer-reviewed study, it's toxic to all life forms, period. So our soils are sterile. We don't see any soil decomposition. The forest floor duff is just building up. And we know it's toxic to root systems. So the trees are dying below ground as well. People don't realize that. That's why the wind blows, trees are falling over everywhere now. And so again, yes, the beetles move in because they pick off dead, dying trees. And we have official agencies blaming just the beetles. Beetles are a symptom of a sick, dead, dying tree. So again, Seth, from every conceivable direction, what's happening in our skies is pounding the nails into our collective coffins. We have to deal with it.
It's just one thing I wanted to also show is that they're now developing aluminum resistant crops. So the same, big companies that are developing seeds and doing all kinds of, GMO modification of, GMO of seeds in agriculture, they're now creating crops that aren't bothered by aluminum. It's like, okay, well, we're going to pump the skies full of aluminum. Then you're going to be forced to buy our aluminum resistant seeds to survive, which is just crazy. But one thing that, as I'm kind of looking at this, I like to try to look at these issues and zoom out and think, why? Okay, if you look at the scale of this, it's not like there's some rogue agency or some rainmaker company that found a way to geoengineer to make some money and sell farmers rain. It's clear that this operation is, by now, it's probably a multi-trillion-dollar operation if you add up the collective cost put into geoengineering easily. It's done at the highest levels of our, not just our government, but our world, right? You mentioned the money printers and again, these systems and families and whatnot that really do control almost everything, unfortunately, except our own souls, which we have, which is, it's like the last frontier, right?
Yes.
But even looking at this happening, it's apparent that this is a massive operation that has to be coordinated at very high levels of our own government, of our own military. So the question I have is, why would our own military and government do this to the American people and destroy the American farmland, the American ecosystem, the American forests? Why would they do that?
Your line of questioning is exactly on target. Your assessment, the points you mentioned are exactly on target. Yes, multi-trillion dollar, no question. Yes, this is not the localized, publicized cloud seeding operations that's meant as a smokescreen. And many people have taken that bait or tried to blend the two. Again, the difference is like an ant compared to an elephant. So when we look at the motive behind these operations, first we have to back up and look at other examples, which we may have discussed previously. But let's take the nuclear bomb detonations for one. They detonated 2,400 plus nuclear bombs. That contaminated the entire planet. Why did they, and who are they? They are those who, again, print the money. That's the top of the power structure pyramid. I don't care who occupies the White House. That's simply all theater. So, and theater designed to polarize populations, by the way, divide and conquer. But they detonated those bombs because there's no satisfying their quest for power and control. None. We're dealing with power addicts. Does an addict care the next fix might kill them? They don't care. So if we look at, again, the detonation of over 2,400 nuclear bombs, we look at Project Starfish Prime, Project Fishbowl, detonation of hydrogen bombs in the magnetosphere that they thought could collapse the entire atmosphere. But they did it anyway. That's what we're dealing with. We're not dealing with sanity. And we know from psychoanalysis, this is right from the manual, studies of the psychological profiles of those in power, that they have a common deficiency. It's, quote, a near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. So they look at this as a risk to risk scenario. That's literally their term. The risk of doing this versus the risk of not doing it, and not for benevolent purposes. I want to make that clear. There's nothing benevolent in what they're doing in our skies. This is about power and control. And part of that power and control, and we can plug this into what's happening right now in the US, part of that power and control is to control public perception, to try to keep the game going as long as possible, to keep the status quo as long as possible, to keep their power in place as long as possible. So by engineering a snowstorm, by engineering snowstorms in New Orleans or what's happening right now, and sensationalizing that and not telling people, oh, by the way, if you want to have some warm weather, go to the Arctic, then the public, and by the way, the eastern half of the US lower 48 is the most anomalously less warm region in the entire world for about 14 years now. That's not nature. That's the biggest military in the world controlling the perception of the greatest US population that lives in the eastern half. That's the most populated portion by far. So they're controlling public perception, which they're good at in every arena. They see the cold, cold, cold. And if you look at what the so-called weather experts are stating on Weather Channel, Weather Central, Weather Nation, all power structure owned entities by Rothschilds and BlackRock, they clearly have talking points. Cold, cold, cold. Dangerous, catastrophic cold, blah. And it is cold on the surface. I'm not denying that, but clearly they're following a script, a narrative. And so at that point, that justifies tweets like President Trump just put out of, where's your global warming now? That's exactly what he put out. And that's a very telling harbinger red flag of why this engineering is going on this scale. And I'm not blaming any political party. I want to make that clear. Again, this is not about political parties. They've all done it going back to the end of World War II, but it's worse now than ever. So when we take the eastern half of the US lower 48, that's less than 1% of the Earth's surface area. That's hardly a snapshot of the entire world. So again, this isn't about Al Gore. It isn't about the environmental groups. Al Gore is clearly a criminal hypocrite. And I would argue Al Gore did exactly what the power structure wanted him to do too. Make people hate your hypocrisy so much that without thinking, without rational thought, without investigation, they take the opposite position. There are people literally, if Al Gore said it was daytime and it was, they would take the position that it's night, even if it's not. So we need to think through this smoke and mirrors equation and put the puzzle pieces together. But bottom line, answer to your question, this is the means by which they have been bringing populations to their knees all over the globe, crushing crops, controlling food supplies, controlling the flow of moisture, thus controlling countries without those populations ever even knowing they were under assault. And the same is true with their manipulation of the US population. And anybody who thinks that those truly in power care about Americans any more than they do the countries they are oppressing around the globe, time to wake up. We're a liability to them.
There's, in addressing your answer to that, there's two books that have really stuck with me, and I should really go back and look at them again. It's People of the Lie and Political Ponerology. And they're both books that are looking at the study of evil. People of the Lie is looking at just kind of the study of grand narcissism and people that you'd say are really a psychopath, right? And same thing with Political Ponerology, where they, kind of what you said, they've identified that it's roughly about 4% of the population.
Yes.
And I remember one of the books described it as, in the place where we have empathy, where we have compassion, there's literally a hole there. It's like the people just don't have it. Like either they weren't born with it, or through some sort of ritual abuse, or who knows what, it was destroyed inside of them. It doesn't exist there anymore. And if you look at Political Ponerology, it talks about how people that don't have that will do whatever it takes to get on top, and they just want more and more power. And so it's looking at basically this ponerology is the study of evil. So political ponerology is the study of the crossover between politics and evil, and people that get into power, into control, positions of control that are evil, and actually how that powerful positions attracts evil. It's because they realize they have more control over other people and they can manipulate. And it's a conclusion I've come to as well. It's just that there are people that have amassed huge amounts of power over the past couple thousand years, and through their bloodlines, they've maintained this power through the banking systems and everything. And these are people that are probably not even human. If we're measuring what is a human is empathy and compassion and the things that make us human, right? That what we feel for each other when we see each other suffering. They don't have that. And so I think that's the only way to really make sense of it, because if we're trying to think, why would they do that? I would never do that. Well, of course I wouldn't, because I'm a real human with a heart and a soul. And I think that I'm glad that you hit on the point of looking at the political parties, because I agree that I think that is just a grand distraction. It's no different than communist China early on, when it was the landlords versus the peasants. They're creating two different boxes to fight each other, because the more they fight each other, the less they focus on the real cause of the problem, which is the controllers that are creating these fractioned systems and societies. So it's good to acknowledge that, because I think it also helps us refocus our own efforts and not wait for, when's Trump going to ban chemtrails? Like, please, Trump ban chemtrails, which I think we saw. We saw RFK talking about it early on. There's a lot of hope. I'm not seeing any difference. I'm not sure about you.
Oh no, there is a difference. They're doubling down on denial. It's worse now than ever. So again, that was an excellent summary you just gave about the, again, profiles of those who crave power and what we've seen. And again, for those that, if you mention anything about the current administration, suddenly you must support the previous administration. That's dichotomous thinking. No, this isn't a you're with us or you're with the terrorist mantra. Too many people programmed to think in those terms. That's not helpful. Bottom line is, now more than ever, we've seen a virtual gutting of any monitoring of environmental anything or climate anything, which is a means for them to cover the tracks of the climate engineers. They're not trying to curtail these operations. They're radically accelerating them. And what's happening in the US right now, is the most aggressive chemical ice nucleation we have seen yet. Texas was hovering in the 90s, near the 90s before all this happened. I'm in Northern California, the wilderness of Northern California, near the Oregon border. Seth, we have not had a freezing temperature here yet. It has not been at freezing yet here, and we're in the middle of winter. People don't realize that. They think whatever's going on outside their doorstep is a snapshot of the world. It couldn't be further from the truth. We're seeing temperatures right now in the middle of winter in the Arctic Circle that are way above freezing. And Antarctica is hitting new records all the time now as well. So again, people need to get past their disdain for the environmental groups. I understand that disdain. We hope the environmental groups will get past their denial, because there's more than enough denial to go around on all sides of the fence here. I want to make that clear. We have the environmental left acknowledging the endless forms of damage the human race is doing to our miraculous planet. But you mentioned climate engineering. Many of them put their fingers in their ears and behave like kindergartners. Can't hear you. They do that because too many on the other side of the fence have adopted this narrative. There's nothing wrong with the planet except climate engineering. Well, of course, that's false. It's an all the above equation. Yes, we're focused on stopping this biggest hole in the bottom of the boat first to allow the planet to respond to the other forms of damage, but it's an all the above equation. So what we would encourage people to do at geoengineeringwatch.org, and what we do with legislators, for example, because we work with many legislators all over the country. There's about 36 states right now in some stage of passing legislation. We have Tennessee, Florida, and Louisiana that's already passed. And I'm not sure why that site, it doesn't seem to be loading for mine. There it goes. It's starting to load now.
So this is the legal action tab.
That's one. It's not updated enough. I testified for Wyoming legislators recently and South Carolina legislators. I'm going to be working with Florida soon. We're communicating with many behind the scenes. We supply our printed materials to them so they can help wake up their colleagues. But the mantra that helps to build bridges instead of burn them is this. It's very simple. How can we have any legitimate discussion about climate, anything, from any perspective, without first and foremost addressing this elephant in the equation? So when the subject of climate comes up, we fall back to that. Let's focus on the biggest hole first. If we get that out of the way, we can look at the other issues. No one should argue that. So when, for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene, she recently tried to forward legislation federally to ban these operations, and I salute her for doing so. I just wish that perhaps Marjorie, we tried to reach her before that and we weren't able to, still have not been able to. I hope we still can. But Marjorie's first lead punch in that fight was to alienate 2/3 of the people we need in this battle. First thing out of her mouth was, well, we all know global warming is a hoax. Just lost half the people we need in the battle. And even from Marjorie's perspective, even if we pretend that the only thing that hurts the planet is climate engineering, even if we pretended that, it's not true, but the planet is still damaged. It's still not a hoax. Climate engineering is fueling the warming of the planet by itself, on top of the other issues. But so that term, or her approach was incorrect from any perspective. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
It would have been so much more effective for her to, again, follow a mantra of either not mentioning that or simply mentioning whatever your perspective is. Don't we all agree we should stop this? And that's the effective route.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that too, because it's funny because back when I was living in the countryside of Ohio, this is 4 or 5 years ago, it was just so funny to kind of watch this play out on the little cul-de-sac that we lived in, this very rural neighborhood. There was a woman that was a college professor that was ultra liberal, like so liberal that she didn't have any kids because she didn't want to impact the climate. Like she didn't want to be a burden on Earth. But she had a beautiful native garden. Her entire property was beautiful native plants, and she put so much care into them. But she was very liberal. Yet the neighbor next to her was very conservative, but he was out there overweight, spraying Roundup out in his yard. And it was just like, there's something wrong with this equation. And so we would go and we could talk to the conservative guy about the Second Amendment and things that we could meet with him. But then the one woman, she loved us until I put up a "Don't Tread on Me" flag in my front yard. I think that was what was kind of, she stopped talking to me after that. I think it was, she's like, oh, these guys aren't really of my kind, I guess. But the thing is actually it was my American flag. It was funny enough. It was really weird how that happened. But so she was someone we could talk to all day long about chemicals and Monsanto and everything. And she was into permaculture, things that we were into. Yet I bet if I would have mentioned to her geoengineering, she would have been kind of closed off to it. Right. And it's just this weird thing that they've done where you're right, by Marjorie coming out and saying, oh, we all know global warming is a hoax. What she's doing is she's like, this is the one issue that we should be able to come together on. It's like looking at, say, the liberals. It's like, hey, if you're conservatives, hey, look, you care about the environment and I care about the environment. And here's my research on how the environment's being damaged by the corrupt government. And here's your research on how the environment's being damaged by the corrupt, corporations backed by the corrupt government. Let's come together on this issue and fight against this. And that's what they don't want. And that's where I think that this really kind of gets into. And I pulled this book out. I was looking for a quote. I couldn't find it because I wanted to show you. But this is a really impactful book. It's called The Crowd. It's by a guy named Gustave Le Bon, who was a polymath in the 1800s. And so it's called The Crowd, A Study of the Popular Mind. And so I've heard things before saying that basically the elites commissioned this guy to put together this research on what causes the fall of a nation, what causes revolutions, etc. But the reason it's called The Crowd is that what he said was actually that the rise and fall of nations, the revolutions, collapses, they're never caused by the leadership. They're always caused by the collective thinking of the population. That was the single driver that would cause Rome to fall or cause a different nation to rise again. It was actually what was the collective thinking of the people. And there's a quote in here that talks about actually that they realized it was the hearts and minds of the people that determine the destiny of a nation. And that's why I think that they've worked so hard to fracture us and to make us hate each other and to confuse us and to alienate us against our friends and our family and our neighbors, because I really believe that the solution to all of this is not through wanting politicians to do things, though it's good to put pressure on because it brings it to light. But the solution is to get as many people around the world, especially here in America, many of the people to unite on this issue. Because I guarantee if 75% of the Americans all knew exactly what was happening, if they were all watching and following your website, and instead of 51 million visitors, it was 51 billion visitors, right? If that was the case, I think they'd have a hard time getting away with this, because then we'd see through the act. Like, we have to pull back the curtain that's hiding Oz. But to do that, we have to collectively do it. I think that's what we have to work towards, which is why I'm doing these interviews. And I think why you're doing a lot of what you're doing as well.
You're completely correct. Your narrative is completely correct. If I could add one more component to that, if we reach that critical mass, and I would argue even a much smaller percentage would get us there, so that our military brothers and sisters, defense contractor individuals and families would then know that by participating in these programs, they're literally participating in their own near-term, extremely near-term demise. And then we have a chance of stopping these operations from the inside out, because our military brothers and sisters are certainly being told that they're participating in some benevolent planet-saving endeavor, which could not be further from the truth. Just like, look, remember the World War II historical footage, or not World War II, but the nuclear bomb testing pre end of the war in Nevada, where they detonate the bomb and the troops jump out of the trench and they run toward the blast center, that's what they were told to do. All of them died. A premature, painful death. They were guinea pigs. So for our citizens, Americans who believe those in power give a damn about our soldiers or them, please wake up. Wake up. It's just like Vietnam and our soldiers spraying Agent Orange, not just on innocent civilians, but on our own troops. Depleted uranium in the Middle East, Gulf War syndrome. How many of our military members died a slow, painful death because of the depleted uranium that was used? I mean, that depleted uranium has a half-life of 4.5 billion years with a B. Those parts of the world are contaminated forever. Deformities of babies in those regions. Now, you have to look at the pictures to believe it. I wonder why these people hate us so much when we go to war for weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist, for 9/11 that clearly the official narrative could not have been further from the truth. That was the new Pearl Harbor. People need to wake up. Wake up. How many times can they use the same model on us again and again and again? And people wave their flags blindly, pretend they're patriots. That's not patriotism. Pretending that This is Stockholm syndrome. Let me, the patriotism we have now is basically Stockholm syndrome. So please, people need to wake the hell up. And again, starting with what we're breathing, let me bring it back to that point. We have some recent peer-reviewed study that indicates, depending on your location and the circumstances, we may be inhaling, and try to get your arms around this. It sounds like my figures are wrong, but they're not. We may be inhaling as many as 20 million nanoparticles in a single breath. How is that possible? Because you can fit 100,000 nanoparticles across the width of a single human hair. And if your listeners went out on a dark night, no light pollution, still air, when these operations are going on, the skies are clearly not clear as they should be. Take the brightest light you can find, aim it straight up at the sky, look straight up through the beam, not horizontally through it, but straight up through it. You have to see it to believe it.
I've done it. It looks like it's snowing.
It looks like you're in a blizzard.
Yeah.
And that's what we're inhaling. That's what's being absorbed into everything, everywhere. And in the case of the soils, again, so much contamination in my region that it's altered soil pH values 10 to 12 times toward alkaline. Our soils are normally acidic here, and I have the USDA historical baselines in my possession from a contact at USDA. So I'm not guessing. We've gone from 5.4 to 6.6. That's 12 times. One point on that scale is a magnitude of 10. Nothing grows here, Seth. Nothing grows. Some of the trees are just dormant. The forests don't smell like forests anymore. That's long gone because the trees are literally almost comatose at this point. And it's not just the contaminated soils. Climate engineering, if we shrink this down to one single component, there are many, but even if we take just one component, climate engineering is destroying the ozone layer. That by itself is an extremely near-term existential threat. And they tell us it's getting better. That's absolute nonsense. Pay attention to your sense of feel. When you have unobstructed sun, and sometimes even through this lens layer of material that they're spraying, it can actually produce a magnification effect. The sun is scorchingly hot.
It's a microwaving feeling when you're out inside of it. And my wife is really sensitive. She'll tell me that. If it's say 75 degrees out and say we're out gardening, if there's been spraying, she can't be out for more than 5 minutes. She'll go, Seth, it feels like it's microwaving my head. And she'll have to go back inside.
It can create a lens effect, and we know that because we had what is probably the world's foremost expert on UV metering working directly for us, former NASA contract engineer with state-of-the-art equipment. We supplied him well into 5 figures, and we verified this lens effect from some of the materials they're spraying. Makes the UV even worse, and we know we're getting UVC on the surface now. That's a DNA damaging spectrum of UV radiation. It's burning the bark off of trees, the cambium layer, the living layer of the tree. We have that all over the forest here on the sun exposed side. The cambium layer is scorched down to the core wood from tip to trunk. And so let's lead this back into the fires. You've seen many in the fires claim they see this stripe of fire going up a tree, and they make all sorts of claims about what that is. Those claims are not correct. That's because when you burn the cambium layer off, the core wood dies. You have a tree full of very easily ignited pulp. And when there's embers blowing through a forest in the fire, it ignites that core. The outside is still alive, so it doesn't burn. Only the core burns. And so you get this burning stripe up a tree. And again, people need to put all the puzzle pieces together, not grab at straws or the first clickbait thing thrown in front of them, that there's space laser beams hitting every tree. And we need to keep it on credible ground if we're going to move this fight forward. Because I know CAL FIRE top officials, that's the biggest firefighting agency in the world, that would address this issue. They know what's going on, but they don't want to be associated with some of those narratives. So they're just hiding in the shadows, and that doesn't help our cause. And I've fought wildland firefighters on the fires on the front line, many of them, running heavy equipment, which I've done for many years, working directly with CAL FIRE. And I'm not guessing. I've done 6 habitat restoration programs in my habitat preserve on the east side of Lake Shasta. I ran every single one of them in the field. I did all the falling of the sick, dead, dying trees because I don't trust anybody else to fall those trees, because many of the ground crews, they don't look up. They just cut a trunk. And so they cut the good trees, leave the bad ones. I mean, I care about every single tree, every single healthy tree that needs to stay in that forest. I'm here for the health of the forest, period. And the only reason the forest is so screwed up, Seth, is because of totally irresponsible logging practices. And what do we hear the narrative from some of the people in higher positions of U.S. agencies that really support the logging industry and so forth? Oh, well, the forests are burning because we're not cutting down enough trees. That is absolute nonsense. Nonsense. So let's give an example to back that up. And we're having to do restoration work now because the forest has been so radically disrupted. All the healthy canopy trees have been taken. So we have the unhealthy trees left, the brush, lower level fuel story builds up. That's from logging. Too much logging, not enough. So if you have an untouched forest, that's the safest forest you can have because the understory's already died out. You have a canopy, the fires burn underneath. So in Siberia, in areas that have never been touched by human anything ever, the burn rate has increased 1,000%, 10 times more. Obviously, there's something else going on. And on the fires too, and I know we're in winter right now and they're engineering winter weather, which is killing trees, which will make the fires burn much hotter in the summer. I would encourage your listeners to search the engineering wildfires section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org because they are literally, there's one particular report that's the most important. It's called Wildfires Serve Geoengineering Agenda. At the top toolbar, engineering winter, engineering droughts, engineering wildfires, and Wildfires Serve Geoengineering Agenda is one of our reports. We know that they are setting the template for these fires and forests to burn with maximum intensity as a form of geoengineering, Seth. They're literally trying to mimic the short-term cooling effects of volcanic eruptions by filling the atmosphere with sun-blocking particles, destroying what's left of the planet's life support systems to provide temporary cooling. Is that not the epitome of human insanity? And we have peer-reviewed study in that report that I just mentioned actually advocating. I'm not theorizing here. We have circles in Washington, Seth, discussing right now what they see as a benefit of a limited nuclear bomb exchange to put enough particulate matter in the atmosphere to cool the planet. If they do that, we're done. Game over. That will destroy, with the ionizing radiation, will destroy what's left of the ozone layer. Game over. That's how insane these people are.
It's overwhelming, certainly, but we still have to do what we can do, right? Which is what you're doing, which is what I'm doing. So I encourage anyone who's made it to the end of the interview. Obviously, you care about this topic. Share this information. Share your website. I'll have all the links for this in the description below. Geoengineeringwatch.org is that website. We just have to continue to get this out to more and more people. Like that's where the power is. Yes,
you're right. And if I could end on an up note, because I know this can be overwhelming. This can shut people down. They just think I can't possibly do anything to make a difference, and that could not be further from the truth. The last 5 minutes of the dimming is what the editor, that he chose to remain anonymous, our editor, but he put together a 5-minute epilogue at the end from quotes I'd made during many broadcasts. It's exactly what I wanted to say to the world. And here's the most important part of that, because this has been a long and arduous battle for me for the last 20 plus years. Believe me, when I started this, nobody listened to a word I said. And now, thankfully, people like you have shown up to help sound the alarm. I'm very grateful to you. And here's the point I want to make, and the point I made at the last 5 minutes of the dimming. Those in power are not gods, and we are not helpless. They want us to believe we're helpless. We are not helpless. And any one of us could be the final pebble that triggers the landslide of awakening. Any one of us. We're all spokes in this wheel, all necessary to make it roll. And if 2 people pass on credible data to 2 more the first day of a 30-day month, and those 2 weeks the second day, at the end of 30 days, you're literally into the millions. If we all work together, start spot fires of awareness, stoke those spot fires until they merge into a blaze that cannot be extinguished, we can put a hole in this dam of denial. We can cause a shockwave around the globe. We can alter the paradigm in the right direction. We can take a quantum leap in the right direction. If we all stand together, we can accomplish that. And if we do, if we can stop what's happening in our skies, the planet can respond on its own to the damage done. And that is the best chance we have. And life is miraculous, Seth, as you know. If it's given any chance at all, it will find a way. But the planet needs us. The web of life needs us. It's now or never. We need to stand together, make every single day count.
Absolutely. Dane, thank you for giving us your time. Thank you for doing what you're doing. It's been great to have you on the show.
Same to you, Seth. Thank you so much for your voice in this battle.
Absolutely. Take care and God bless.
You too, brother.